The wind clawed across the open plains as if it wanted to erase what little the 7 children had left. Fresh dirt lay piled beside a narrow wooden cross, its surface already drying and cracking beneath the afternoon sun. The town preacher had said a few hurried words before riding off, hat low over his eyes. The townsfolk lingered only long enough to whisper their predictions. They won't last the winter. The oldest boy, Samuel, stood stiffly at the front. 16, though grief had carved deeper years into his face. His boots were too small, his coat too thin, but his shoulders were squared like a man twice his age. Behind him, his brothers and sisters huddled close together. Clara clutched baby Rose, who didn't understand why Mama wouldn't wake up. The twins tried not to cry. The youngest boy kicked at the dirt, jaw trembling, angry at a world that had taken too much. They had no father to claim them. No kin willing to feed 7 extra mouths. Their wagon sat crooked near the edge of town, one wheel splintered from the long journey that had brought them here with hope just weeks before sickness took their mother. Inside it were 3 blankets, a sack of flour, and a rusted skillet. That was the full inventory of their inheritance. When the crowd thinned, Samuel stepped closer to the grave. He swallowed hard and spoke quietly, so only his siblings could hear. "I'll take care of you. I promise." The words felt too big for his chest, but he forced them out anyway. A gust of wind nearly knocked little Rose sideways. Clara tightened her grip. "Where are we gonna go?" she whispered. Samuel looked toward the town, at the saloon doors swinging lazily, at the general store where men stood pretending not to stare, at the wide ranch lands stretching beyond the last building. He didn't have an answer. That's when the steady rhythm of hoofbeats cut through the silence. A tall bay horse moved slowly down the main street, its rider sitting straight-backed in the saddle. The rancher was a familiar sight in town, though not a friendly one. He kept to himself, bought supplies in silence, and rode back out to the largest spread of land in the territory. People said he preferred cattle to conversation. He drew his horse to a stop when he reached the wagon. His gaze shifted from the broken wheel to the thin blankets to the children standing like a fragile wall around the grave. He said nothing at first. His eyes rested on Samuel the longest. Samuel met his stare, refusing to look away. Pride was the only thing he had left that hadn't been buried. The rancher finally dismounted, boots landing heavy in the dust. He removed his gloves slowly, studying the grave marker, then the sky, then the children again. The baby began to cry, sharp and hungry. No one from town stepped forward. The rancher walked to the wagon and crouched by the shattered wheel. He pressed a hand against the splintered wood, testing its weakness. Then he stood and faced Samuel. "You know how to work?" he asked, voice low and rough from years of wind and silence. Samuel hesitated only a second. "Yes, sir." The rancher nodded once, as if that was the only answer that mattered. He looked at the other children, at their hollow cheeks, their wary eyes. "Sunrise," he said, "be ready." And with that, he mounted his horse again, leaving behind a trail of dust, and, for the first time since the earth covered their mother's coffin, a thin, trembling thread of hope. The first morning at the ranch began before the sun had fully broken over the horizon. Frost clung to the tall grass like shattered glass, and the air carried that sharp, biting cold that made every was their chance, maybe their only one. They rode out in the rancher's wagon, silent and stiff. None of the children spoke. The ranch house rose from the plains like something carved from the earth itself, wide, sturdy, and weathered by time. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. It looked too big for one man. Too quiet. The rancher was waiting outside when they arrived, sleeves rolled, hands already dusted with feed. He didn't greet them with smiles or soft words. He simply handed Samuel a pair of worn leather gloves. "Barn first," he said. "Cattle need feeding. Fence lines weak on the north end." Samuel nodded and followed him without hesitation, his younger brothers trailing close behind. The barn smelled of hay and livestock, thick and warm compared to the brittle cold outside. The rancher showed them how to measure grain properly, how to secure the gates so nothing slipped loose. He worked beside them, not above them, and though he said little, his presence felt steady, not threatening. The girls were led inside the house. Clara stepped cautiously across the threshold, expecting something grand or delicate, but the interior was simple: wood floors, sturdy furniture, a long table scarred by years of use. A cast iron stove radiated warmth in the corner. "There's flour in the pantry," the rancher said, removing his hat. "Water from the pump out back." Keep it clean. Clara nodded, trying to hide her nerves. She tied her sleeves back and began kneading dough the way her mother had taught her. The twins fetched water, their small boots thudding softly across the porch. Baby Rose sat near the stove, wrapped in a borrowed blanket the rancher had quietly placed around her shoulders without a word. The day stretched long. Samuel's hands blistered by noon, but he refused to slow down. He fixed sections of fencing with careful determination, copying the rancher's knots and hammer strikes. His brothers carried tools twice their weight, stumbling but never complaining. Every task felt like proof they were useful, not burdens. Inside, the house slowly shifted from silence to life. The scent of fresh bread filled the air. Clara swept dust from corners that hadn't seen attention in years. The twins giggled when flour dusted their noses, then quickly hushed themselves, afraid laughter might be unwelcome. At midday, the rancher stepped into the house, boots heavy against the floorboards. He paused at the doorway, taking in the sight: bread cooling on the table, sunlight spilling across clean wood floors, children moving carefully but confidently through the space. He removed his hat again, slower this time. They ate together in near silence. Samuel waited until the rancher took the first bite before allowing his siblings to reach for theirs. The food was plain: beans, bread, a bit of salted meat, but it tasted like safety. That evening, exhaustion settled into every bone. The youngest boy nearly fell asleep at the table. The rancher stood and cleared his throat. "Rooms upstairs," he said. "Plenty of blankets." The children froze. Rooms. Blankets. Plural. As they climbed the staircase, hesitant but hopeful, the rancher remained by the fire. He listened to the faint creak of floorboards above him, to the whisper of children discovering beds of their own. For the first time in years, the house no longer echoed. And though he would never admit it aloud, neither did his heart. Winter arrived with teeth. Snow swept across the plains in thick, blinding sheets, swallowing fence posts and turning the open range into a white ocean. The ranch demanded more work now, not less. Pipes froze. Cattle huddled against bitter winds. Every morning began in darkness and ended in exhaustion. But the children did not break. Samuel rose before the rancher most days, already pulling on his boots when the older man stepped into the kitchen. His shoulders had broadened over the past months, his movements steadier, more certain. He no longer waited for instructions, he anticipated them. The younger boys followed his lead, racing to the barn with an eagerness that surprised even themselves. Inside the house, Clara had grown into her role with quiet strength. She managed meals with efficiency, stretching supplies carefully through long storms. The twins kept the floors dry from melted snow, their laughter now frequent and unafraid. Baby Rose had begun to toddle across the wooden planks, tiny boots tapping against the floor as if she had always belonged there. The ranch, once silent and solitary, had changed. There were muddy footprints by the door, mittens drying by the fire, the sound of children arguing over chores and then making peace before bedtime. Life had settled into the walls. One late afternoon, as snow drifted lazily from a gray sky, a rider approached the house. The town clerk, wrapped in a thick wool coat, dismounted with stiff movements and brushed frost from his mustache. He carried a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. The rancher stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Afternoon," the clerk said, nodding toward the barn where the boys worked and the window where Clara stood watching. "Town council's been asking questions." The rancher's jaw tightened slightly. "About what?" "Those children." The clerk opened the folder. "No legal guardian, no documentation. Technically, they're wards of the county. Could be sent east, or divided up." Inside the barn, Samuel had gone still. He wasn't meant to hear, but the wind carried words in ways it shouldn't. Sent away. Divided up. The rancher didn't look back at the children immediately. He kept his eyes on the clerk. "They work here," he said evenly. "They live here." "That may be," the clerk replied, adjusting his spectacles. "But on paper, they belong to no one." Silence stretched between them, thick as the falling snow. Then the rancher reached for the folder. He flipped through the documents without haste. His hand, rough from years of labor, held the pen firmly. "They belong to me," he said. Through the window, Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. The twins froze. Samuel stepped closer, heart pounding in his chest. The rancher signed his name once. Then again, and again, each child's given name now followed by his surname, written in strong, unshaking ink. When he finished, he handed the papers back. "That'll settle it," he said. The clerk nodded slowly. "Yes." It will. As the rider disappeared down the snowy trail, the rancher turned toward the barn. 7 children stood watching him, hope and disbelief shining in their eyes. He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward under their stares. "Supper's near ready," he muttered. But before he could step away, the smallest boots thudded across the porch. Rose threw her tiny arms around his legs. One by one, the others followed, not out of fear this time, but love. Under the wide winter sky, they were no longer nameless. They were a family.